Hey, this is Mark A. Altman.
And this is Darren Doctorman, and we are two-thirds of the Inglorious
Treksperts.
Treksperts.
And to make up for the missing man, we have none other than very special guest, Robert Meyer Burnett, joining us to celebrate this very special day.
It is very special, and it's my favorite.
They said
45.
it's a day that lives in infamy, but they weren't referring to this movie. They were referring to Pearl Harbor. But of
Right.
course, there was something that loomed equally large in the annals of motion picture history for us, which, of course, well, not as much as Pearl Harbor, but in terms of movies, that was significant. And it was the release on December 7th, 1979, 45 years ago, Star Trek. And this is how important it was. It wasn't Star Trek the movie. It wasn't Star Trek the Voyager Chronicles. It was Star Trek the motion picture. That means it's important, baby. It's a motion picture. It's projected. It's shot on film. It's
Yeah.
epic.
And
Yeah.
something named Star Trek the Motion Picture would have been released even if they hadn't finished the movie.
Yeah.
And they kind of didn't finish the movie. But that's okay.
Yeah, and we were really we're really excited to commemorate this anniversary by turning to the book. The book.
The book. Don't make fun of the book.
The Star Trek the Motion Picture novelization by Gene Roddenberry, which is really a remarkable piece of Star Trek ephemera, isn't it, Rob? I mean, the fact that Gene Roddenberry actually wrote this book, paid $450,000 to write it, and it tells you a lot about the kind of person Gene was in reading it.
No, and he does fill in. There's footnotes, and there's scenes, and there's concepts and ideas that they could never address on the original series that I thought was, as a 12-year-old, when I read the book and when I saw the movie, it was very compelling, and it seemed like the right thing. Even though looking back on it now, it might be a little weird, but Star Trek the Motion Picture came out 10 years after Star Trek had gone off the air. And back then, the idea that this movie was even happening at all was mind blowing. I mean, I can't reiterate to people what it was like to go and actually see this. It was a dream come true. It was a dream I'd had so many times, to see something new and to see
I know
it.
you wore a uniform to school.
Oh yeah, in such grand fashion. And I'd counted down the days, and it was, as Keir Dullea said in 2010, something wonderful.
Yeah.
Like
No, I mean, it was remarkable for all of us. Darren, what was it like that day when you went to go see Star Trek the Motion Picture? Tell us
Well,
your
see,
story.
like Rob, I had gotten the novel beforehand, and I had read it all the way through just one time. And of course, I got all these amazing images in my mind, specifically from the last act of them going inside the Voyager brain room, and saw all the wonderful descriptions of what happened. And I went and saw the movie, and I loved it, but it was not like the book. It felt unfinished, let's just say. And but I saw it. I think when it first came out, I saw it 5 times in the first release, and of course hundreds of times since. But it made a big impression on me, and I loved it. But I knew that it could be maybe something more someday.
It's hard for me to believe this was 45 years ago, because I remember that day so vividly,
Yeah.
not just because we recreated it for a movie, Rob, which in fact is what happened to me when I went to see when I went to see Star Trek: The Motion Picture, where I was turned away, and only recently realized the reason we were turned away from the theater was because it was the Warriors. It was because the theater was not allowing teenagers, people under 18 or 17, into the theater after 4 o'clock, I believe. It's only recently that I realized, oh, this is a couple of weeks. Months after the Warriors came out, and they must have had trouble, because a lot of theaters in New York had trouble with teenagers during the release of the Warriors. So
Another Paramount film.
another Paramount film, right? And this theater showed Paramount and Columbia Pictures film. So I put it all together. It only took me 40 years, but I figured it out. And of course, as I've told the story many times, couldn't get into the theater, and I was apoplectic, and I had 2 good friends with me, and we couldn't believe they weren't letting us in the theater. And I had the great inspiration to go find my mom, who would be depositing her check at the Brooklyn Savings Bank, because this is back long before ATM. And I was lucky enough to find her online in line at the teller, and convinced her to take pity on me and take us to see Star Trek: The Motion Picture, for which I will always be eternally grateful, and which he will always eternally blame me. But I know
Marilyn
what you
Kent's
blame
is
me for.
grateful.
Yeah, Marilyn Kent's is grateful. And my mom loves Free Enterprise, and she loves that Marilyn Kent's played her in a movie. But it was a really remarkable day, and you know, I could tell you, even though the theater is no longer there, where I was sitting. I'll never forget that overture coming on, the Klingon ships coming. I remember it like it was yesterday, and this was 45 years ago. And of course, I equally remember being in Midtown New York at Willoughby's, which was an electronics store, and seeing a VHS for the first time, and they had Star Trek: The Motion Picture playing on a TV on the display at Willoughby's, and I'm like, I must have this. I mean, oh my God, it is a machine that plays Star Trek: The Motion Picture on a television set. Yeah. And I knew that, oh my God, this would be the foundation of my home video library that was soon to come. So it was just a spectacular day. And we've had incredible history with Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Of course, DAREN not only went on to associate produce and do the visual effects for the director's edition very successfully, that has become sort of the beloved final version of that film. But Rob, having done Free Enterprise and having just been a huge part of this, and working with Bill Shatner, and it's just amazing that we have this connection to this movie that meant so much to us as kids, and continues to obsess us even to this day.
And I have to say, one of my favorite photos that I have on my Facebook page, and I love it when it pops up, is when we were in the lobby of the Directors Guild of America with Robert Wise, seeing the movie projected before DAREN and his compatriots, Dave Fine and Mike Messino and everybody that worked on it, to see the film with the director. Yeah. And I'll tell you a funny story. Director Stanley Kramer taught a class at the local Bellevue Community College where I grew up, and he would bring in luminaries to discuss their films. And he brought in Robert Wise to speak. Wow. And I went up, and he was a great speaker at that time. And we're talking 1984. And I took my Star Trek: The Motion Picture one sheet up to him. And I was the youngest person in it was all college students and older. I was the only kid in high school that was in this class. And I unfurled the poster for Robert Wise. And he looked at it. He was so kind and so nice. And he looked up at me, and he knew he goes, "Oh,
that one."
That one. And he signed it, and it was delightful, but he understood. He understood.
Yeah.
But he appreciated the fact that I was there to listen to him speak in the first place. So
it's remarkable to look back on this. I mean, I remember one of the first Star Trek conventions I went to, George Takei was speaking, and the audience, they were passing out a petition to try and get Paramount to release a special edition. This is before the ABC cut, a special edition of the movie, a finished version in 70 millimeter, with missing footage and all this stuff. And they were passing around this petition, which I signed for all the good it did. It only took 30 years or something. but it's so interesting, because even then people knew that this movie was rushed into theaters, and
Was George Takei passing around this petition?
No, he was not.
Because he wanted his scene with him.
He wanted to be a captain. He wanted to merge with Ilia. He wanted to merge with Decker. Yeah. But it was not the case. It's and he was great. And it was the first time I ever saw George speak, and he was wonderful, and it was so interesting in the wake of the release of Star Trek: The Motion Picture, because we were all so jazzed, and we just couldn't wait to hear news on Star Trek II. What felt like an eternity before Star Trek II became a reality. It was really only a
couple of years,
but it felt like forever. Waiting to hear if there would be another movie, because of course the film, even though it made a lot of money, didn't make as much money as they had hoped.
They wanted it to.
Yeah. Cost. Yeah, exactly. But the thing that's so interesting about the novelization is it is Gene Roddenberry uncensored, because of course with the studio had a lot of notes. There was a lot of infighting. The cast had a lot to say. Obviously, Harold Livingston had a lot to say. Jeffrey Katzenberg had a lot to say. So the movie is, I wouldn't say it's Robert Wise's movie. I wouldn't say it's Gene Roddenberry's movie. I wouldn't say it's Harold Livingston's movie. It's not Bill Shatner.
Definitely the results of a committee.
It's I'm not a committee, but it's a committee. a made movie, whereas the book is pure, unadulterated Roddenberry, and that's what makes it so interesting. He tells the story that he wanted to tell without a filter, and at times it's really interesting, compelling. At times it's really gonzo. At times it's lascivious. I mean, 2 pages describing the sonic shower, if I recall. It's really a fascinating a product of its time. It's a delightful read, and there's a lot of Star Trek what ifs because he introduces the concept of the communicator that's embedded inside your head, which never became a reality. The way he postulates the 23rd century, which feels more like Logan's Run than it does Star Trek, with the new humans and the fact, and the free sexuality and lovemaking that he describes ad nauseum throughout
and
the
that
book.
Starfleet is kind of an offshoot. It's not representative of the humans on Earth.
Yeah.
Basically.
No, but I did love that because we never saw Earth, Earth of the 23rd century in Star Trek, and all of these things. Because I loved Logan's Run. I saw it when I was 9 in the same theater that I saw the gigantic John Dance Theater. I saw Superman the movie there. I saw Spy Who Loved Me there. It was this huge, gigantic, like 1,500 seat theater. It was huge, and I had these seminal experiences of these science fiction epics that blew my mind, and to see Star Trek the Motion Picture on that screen, it was, the validation for Star Trek the Motion Picture was Star Trek the Motion Picture on the big screen felt like how I thought about Star Trek in my own mind. I saw it as this much larger than life thing, and that the TV, it was always so frustrating. We had a pretty big TV, but Star Trek always seemed constrained to me. Yeah. And when I saw Star Trek the Motion Picture in widescreen on this gigantic screen, I'm like, well, of course.
It was almost as if this was the real Star Trek. And
yes.
the TV show was just a version of the real Star Trek.
Yes, and reading the novelization also brought all these, because it did talk about the new humans, and it did talk about all of this stuff that was, I'm like, of course, this is what it should be. I saw Logan's Run. I know what the future looks like. Of course.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I talked about this I did a podcast recently, Escape Hatch, where I talked about Star Trek the Motion Picture for the anniversary. But one of the things I talked about, which I'll reiterate, which you alluded to just now, was we had never seen Earth in the 23rd century. We had seen it in the 60s because there are a couple of episodes where they go back in time to the 60s. So to see people who weren't there can't, because now it's been in Next Gen, it's been in Deep Space Nine, it's been in Enterprise. But at the time, seeing Starfleet headquarters, in San Francisco, and seeing Earth in the 23rd century was incredible. It was like blew your mind, because like, oh my God, we're seeing what Earth is like in the 23rd century. It was just stunning. And of course, seeing the Golden Gate Bridge, and which obviously is something you made even better in the director's edition, was just remarkable.
And how many people there were.
Yeah.
And
there were so many extras going to and fro, and all of this activity, and people talking, and to see Kirk in it wasn't, it's still Starfleet headquarters, but it's like you're seeing him in a train station.
Right.
Yeah.
He might have been in New York City, and to see
several of those extras looked like they were from Logan's Run.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, they absolutely did. And
no question, it looks like Logan's Run.
And his introduction in a civilian 23rd century environment was wild.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, Rob, I'm so glad you said that. Everyone talks about the incredible movie star introduction of Captain Kirk in Star Trek II. No question. When he's backlit and he enters the bridge, open her up, fantastic. But they don't give credit that is due to Kirk's entrance in Star Trek The Motion Picture, which is equally great. When we find him in close-up, his eyes through the window of the shuttle, and he comes out of the shuttle
in that badass Admiral's uniform.
Yeah. That is just as impactful as the Star Trek II introduction.
Well, even more so, because this is the first time we've seen him in 10 years.
Yeah. No, fantastic. And one of the great things is DAREN did this live at our Star Trek Vegas panel, and much to our everlasting appreciation, he recreated it for this very special episode of Inglorious Treksperts. And we're going to turn over the podcast to DAREN's one-man show. It truly is a one-man show of Star Trek The Motion Picture, and I think it's utterly compelling. I hope you do as well. I'm sure you will. And on behalf of Robert Meyer Burnett, DAREN DOCHTERMAN, and myself, Mark Altman, There is no comparison. The human adventure is just beginning. And now we give to you, ladies and gentlemen, DAREN DOCHTERMAN, reading from Star Trek the Motion Picture by Gene Roddenberry.
Save big with Kroger's 12 Merry Days of Deals. From December 4th through the 15th, you can clip a hot new deal each day on our app or website. And if you're a Boost member, you can save even more. So don't miss out and be sure to check our app or website every day from December 4th through the 15th to clip each day's hot new deal. It's 12 Merry Days of Deals, a holly jolly way to save for the holidays at Kroger.
This is the sound of your ride home with Dad after he caught you vaping. Awkward, isn't it? Most vapes contain seriously addictive levels of nicotine and disappointment. Know the real cost of vapes. Brought to you by the FDA.
Future you faces some big expectations. Work out more, go to bed earlier, and most importantly, make smart money decisions. Thankfully, today you has Bank of America. One place with tools and guidance to help balance tasks from budgeting to saving. So you can just be you with big plans. Do more with a bank that asks, what would you like the power to do? Explore our tips and more at bankofamerica.com/futureyou.
Hey, it's Austin James. Yes, I'm living with diabetes, but it doesn't have to define me. Thanks to the Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor, I get real-time glucose readings throughout the day. The Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor is small and easy to wear, giving me the freedom to focus on my life as a parent and a musician. Now this is progress. You can get a free sensor at freestylelibre.us.
Offer available for people who qualify. Visit myfreestyle.us to see all terms and conditions. Certain exclusions apply. Data on file. Abbott Diabetes Care. For prescription only. Safety info found at freestylelibre.us.
The human adventure is just beginning. Star Trek, the motion picture, a novel by Star Trek's creator, Gene Roddenberry, based on the screenplay by Harold Livingston and the story by Alan Dean Foster. Admiral Kirk's preface. My name is James Tiberius Kirk. Kirk, because my father and his male forebears followed the old custom of passing along a family identity name. I received James because it was both the name of my father's beloved brother, as well as that of my mother's first love instructor. Tiberius, as I am forever tired of explaining, was the Roman emperor whose life, for some unfathomable reason, fascinated my grandfather Samuel. This is not trivial information. For example, the fact that I use an old-fashioned male surname says a lot about both me and the service to which I belong. Although the male surname custom has become rare among humans elsewhere, it remains a fairly common thing among those of us in Starfleet. We are a highly conservative and strongly individualistic group. The old customs die hard with us. We submit ourselves to starship discipline because we know it is made necessary by the realities of deep space exploration. We are proud that each of us has accepted this discipline voluntarily, and doubly proud when neither temptation nor jeopardy is able to shake our obedience to the oath we have taken. Some critics have characterized us of Starfleet as primitives, and with some justification. In some ways, we do resemble our forebears of a couple of centuries ago more than we do most people today. We are not part of those increasingly large numbers of humans who seem willing to submerge their own identities into the groups to which they belong. I'm prepared to accept the possibility that these so-called new humans represent a more highly evolved breed, capable of finding rewards in group consciousness that we more primitive individuals will never know. For the present, however, this new breed of human makes a poor space traveler, and Starfleet must depend on us primitives for deep space exploration. It seems an almost absurd claim that we primitives make better space travelers than highly evolved, superbly intelligent, and adaptable new humans. The reason for this paradox is best explained in a Vulcan study of Starfleet's early years, during which vessel disappearances, crew defections, and mutinies had brought deep space exploration to a near halt. This once controversial report diagnosed those mysterious losses as being caused directly by the fact that Starfleet's recruitment standards were dangerously high. That is, Starfleet Academy cadets were then being selected from applicants having the highest possible test scores on all categories of intelligence and adaptability. Understandably, it was believed that such qualities would be helpful in dealing with the unusually varied life patterns which starship crews encounter during deep space exploration. Something of the opposite turned out to be true. The problem was that sooner or later, starship crew members must inevitably deal with life forms more evolved and advanced than their own. The result was that those superbly intelligent and flexible minds being sent out by Starfleet could not help but be seduced eventually by the higher philosophies, aspirations, and consciousness levels being encountered. I've always found it fun and amusing that my Academy class was the first group selected by Starfleet on the basis of somewhat more limited intellectual agility. It is made doubly amusing, of course, by the fact that our 5-year mission was so well documented due to an ill-conceived notion by Starfleet that the return of the USS Enterprise merited public notice. Unfortunately, Starfleet's enthusiasm affected even those who chronicled our adventures, and we were all painted somewhat larger than life, especially myself. Eventually, I found that I had been fictionalized into some sort of modern Ulysses, and it has been painful to see my command decisions of those years so widely applauded, whereas the plain facts are that 94 of our crew met violent deaths during those years, and many of them would still be alive if I had acted either more quickly or more wisely. Nor have I been as foolishly courageous as depicted. I've never happily invited injury. I've disliked in the extreme every duty circumstance which has required me to risk my life. But there appears to be something in the nature of depictors of popular events which leads them into the habit of exaggeration. As a result, I became determined that if I ever again found myself involved in an affair attracting public attention, I would insist that some way be found to tell the story more accurately. As some of you will know, I did become involved in such an affair. In fact, an event which threatened the very existence of Earth. Unfortunately, this has, again, brought me to the attention of those who record such happenings. Accordingly, although there be many other ways in which this story is told or depicted, I have insisted that it also be set down in a written manuscript which would be subject to my correction and my final approval. This is that manuscript, presented to you here as an old-style printed book. While I cannot control other depictions of these events that you may see, hear, and feel, I can promise that every description, idea, and word on these pages is the exact and true story of Voyager and Earth, as it was seen, heard, and felt by James T. Kirk. Author's Preface. Considering Admiral James Kirk's comments in his own preface, it may seem strange that he chose me as the one to write this book. I was, after all, somewhat a key figure among those who chronicled his original 5-year mission in a way which the Admiral has criticized as inaccurately larger than life. I suspect that the thing which finally recommended me to the Admiral was the fact that I have always cherished books as much as he does. Or perhaps he thought I would be more trustworthy when working with words rather than with images. Either way, it is clear he knew that he could guarantee the accuracy of this by insisting that the manuscript be read and, where necessary, corrected by everyone involved in the events being described. Spock, Dr. McCoy, Admiral Nagura, Commander Scott, the Enterprise bridge crew, and almost everyone else listed on these pages have been given the opportunity to review every word describing the events in which they took any part. These final printed pages reflect their comments as well as Admiral Kirk's determination that this be the whole and full truth of what actually happened in the events described here. Finally, on a more personal note, why am I concerning myself with the Enterprise and its crew once again? Having depicted them already with at least some popular success, could I have not given this same effort to new and freshly challenging subjects? Of course. Any civilized individual, whether author or not, one is hardly a prerequisite for the other, has no end of events and subjects clamoring for and doubtlessly deserving attention. Why Star Trek again? I suppose the real truth is that I have always looked upon the Enterprise and its crew as my own private view of Earth and humanity in microcosm. If this is not the way we really are, it seems to me most certainly a way we ought to be. During its voyages, the Starship Enterprise always carried much more than mere respect and tolerance for other life forms and ideas. It carried the more positive force of love for the almost limitless variety within our universe. It is this capacity for love for all things which has always seemed to me as the first indication that an individual or a race is approaching adulthood. There may still be a long and awkward years for humanity between now and maturity, but we have at least come within some reach of understanding that our future can hold any new dimensions of challenge and happiness that we desire and deserve. While we humans may still be a considerable distance from understanding truth, or even of being able to cope with it, I believe that we are at last beginning to understand that love is somehow integral to truth. Perhaps it demarks the path leading there. Much of my pleasure in Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Uhura, Scotty, Chekhov, Chapel, and Rand had to do with such thoughts. I have always found some hope for myself in the fact that the Enterprise crew could be so humanly fallible and yet be some of those greater things too. Gene Roddenberry.
Chapter 4. Whatever one prefers to call it, Starfleet Command, Fleet Headquarters, or the Admiralty, it is centered in a structure which thrusts itself magnificently spaceward out of the redwood forest of San Francisco's Old City Peninsula. Although some museum cities have taller buildings preserved from the industrial past, Starfleet's headquarters are still a distinctive landmark in this world where so much of the clutter of our lives has been placed underground. Just under 2 hours ago, Kirk had taken the tube from Gibraltar to Los Angeles Island, where he had caught the first northbound air tram. Now, 15 minutes later, the clear blue waters of San Francisco Bay were in full view. As always, the sight of Starfleet's headquarters seemed to make Kirk's heart beat a bit faster. Since his midshipman days, he has always admired the clean symmetry of the design and its dramatic combination of space and Earth materials. There was an almost storybook castle suggestion in the way its titanium blue superstructure rose up out of its gray granite base. It had always been to Kirk a statement in architectural poetry about a very necessary relationship between the mud below and the stars above. Today, however, no such thoughts entered Kirk's mind. He was an angry and disillusioned man, with much of his anger and bittersweet directed at himself. How was it possible he could have spent almost 3 years so totally blind to the fact that the commanding admiral had been manipulating him? Starfleet in 5 minutes. It was the computer's routine announcement, signaling descent. Below them, Kirk could make out the sparse line of slender pylons whose microwaves beamed power and guidance up to the tram. In only a few minutes, he would begin a confrontation that would decide whether he remained in Starfleet, or lived, or died, or even gave a damn which of these happened. The key was Commanding Admiral Hayakiro Nagura. Kirk had no doubts left about why Nagura had ordered Lori Siana to make her holocom visit to Gibraltar. Faced with all the pressures of the intruder emergency, the commanding admiral had hurriedly assigned Lori to placate a potentially troublesome James Kirk. Nagura must have assumed that since she had managed Kirk so well once, she would find a way to do it again. But this time, Kirk had finally felt himself being manipulated. Does familiarity breed contempt, even within admiralties? Perhaps, as the recent years passed, a desk-bound and miserable James Kirk had seemed easier and easier to manipulate. There had been nothing recently that would remind Nagura, or even Lori, that he was still the same man listed so prominently in the Enterprise logbook. Perhaps he really hadn't been the same man, at least not until now. To Kirk, it was as if he had unexpectedly been given the full use of his eyes and ears again, and his full mind. How incredible it had been that he had stopped analyzing, questioning, doubting. In deep space, it would have cost lives, perhaps his entire vessel. Here, he had even noticed how Nagura had been using him. How could he have missed seeing it? From the day he had brought his battered starship and crew back from their long mission, Kirk had become uniquely valuable to Nagura. Not to Nagura the man, kindly, a great-great-grandfather a dozen times over, and a helpful friend since Kirk's junior lieutenant days. Kirk's value was to Hayakiro Nagura, commanding admiral, whose oath it was to make any sacrifice or pay any cost necessary to fulfilling his responsibilities to his beloved Starfleet. The new humans among Earth's population had become increasingly critical of Starfleet's cost, of Starfleet's aim, and of its value. Admiral Nagura could not avoid seeing immediately the value of a living symbol, a carefully designed hero figure who could awe the impressionable and confront the critics with arguments taken from actual experiences out there. And Starfleet would have needed that hero symbol here, not out of sight somewhere on another long starship mission. Alcatraz Children's Park had hardly slipped past the view on the left when Kirk felt the tram's inertia dampeners hum into life. There was no motion sensation at all as the tram dipped sharply to the right, decelerating fast. He caught a quick glimpse of the mirror blue of the Admiralty towering high above them, and then suddenly the tram was through the Telegraph Hill entry and was settling to a stop at the terminal beneath Starfleet headquarters. Kirk was the first out, hurrying through the high-domed interior, oblivious to the striking view of San Francisco Bay through the broad tram entry opening. The place was busy, and only later would Kirk remember that most of the facial expressions here, at least the human ones which could be read, were somber and worried. He was unconscious of the fact that his own center of interest had changed completely in the last few hours. Although he still believed he had hurried here out of professional concern over the mysterious intruder, his inner mind was increasingly thinking of a vessel called Enterprise. Commander Sonak. Sonak turned, startled to have his name called in public. On Vulcan, it would have been a shameful breach of privacy. The Vulcan fleet scientist was still more startled to see that it was Kirk, who certainly knew and respected Vulcan tastes. He knew that some extraordinary urgency could be responsible for such discourtesy. Have you received your appointment as Enterprise Science Officer? The Vulcan nodded. Based, I am told, on your recommendations, Admiral. Thank you. The thank you was unnecessary, but Sonak added it nevertheless. This human, Kirk, had many times demonstrated himself worthy of respect. Then why aren't you aboard? Sonak closed his mind to this offensive directness. Captain Decker requested I complete a final science briefing here before... Kirk interrupted. Here? At Starfleet? The Enterprise is in final preparation to leave dock, which will require at least 20 more hours at minimum, Admiral. She'll leave in 12 hours, corrected Kirk. Report to me aboard as soon as possible. To you, sir? Kirk nodded firmly. I intend to have a brief meeting with Nagura, after which I will go directly to the Enterprise. Then Kirk turned and strode away, hurrying toward the turbolifts. The Vulcan gazed after him, lifting an eyebrow quizzically. Had this seemed a slightly different Kirk from the one Sonak had known previously? He wished that humans were not such an enigma. If Kirk had thought of the Enterprise before, it had been as an impossible dream. Starship Command was a way of life that a flag officer could never again enjoy, at least so long as the officer stayed in Starfleet. Eventually, the thought of resignation from the service would have come to Kirk's mind, although he could never know the incredible freedom and independence of Starship Command again. There were at least other kinds of vessels out there. As Kirk made his way to Nagura's office, the Enterprise was very much in his thoughts again. He had no idea, however, how much the need for the starship was motivating him. He sincerely believed that he came here because an emergency existed and Enterprise was needed, and that he, Kirk, was a better choice to command her than the admittedly talented but much less experienced Decker. This must be rather difficult for you, said Nagura. Captain Decker has been something of your protege, hasn't he? Yes, sir. But I don't see how that makes it difficult. I've recommended him for jobs in the past because he was the best man available. In this case, he is not. Kirk knew himself to be motivated and determined, as he had not been for years, and he had powerful arguments to use. The last 5 years of Enterprise logs supported his contention that Nagura's greatest need was not a captain familiar with a rebuilt vessel, but rather one with the greatest possible experience in dealing with deep space unknowns, such as the one now hurtling toward Earth. At first, Nagura had seemed indifferent and impatient, but Kirk had seen that the commanding admiral was also troubled and tired. Logs aside, was today's Kirk a better captain than the alert and upcoming young Decker? How much had Kirk been damaged by almost 3 years on the ground in an unfamiliar and unhappy environment? Ordinarily, Kirk would never have risked this direct confrontation with the commanding admiral, but this was the first real challenge Kirk had faced in these past 3 years, and Nagura, however dynamic and fearsome his personality, was also the man who had manipulated him, used him. This was a battle that Kirk was determined to win. Kirk could see that Nagura was beginning to question the decision to use Decker, being unusually patient, incredibly so considering his reputation. It was becoming obvious that he must feel genuine regret over the way he had forced Kirk into flag rank. Kirk had been with Nagura for 12 minutes. He had never known a visitor or decision here to last that long. Then he felt a chill as Nagura came abruptly to his feet. The entire staff considered this at length, Jim, said Nagura. I'm afraid that every point you've made has already been carefully considered. Admiral, these points were neither carefully nor properly considered since I was not present. Kirk knew that his only chance now was to challenge Nagura directly. And now that I am present, I submit that it is your responsibility to inform me of whatever negative arguments were made against my selection. As a flag officer and a member of Nagura's staff, Kirk had both a right and an obligation to know of anything in his professional performance, which his peers considered to be substandard. Nagora's eyes remained fixed on Kirk's as 5 seconds passed, then 10, 20. Kirk fought to keep the slightest expression off his own face. He sensed that everything would be won or lost now in the next minute. How badly do you want her back? The Enterprise? I can't deny it. It'll be pleasant to be back aboard her. Jim, I am placing you on your honor. If there is the slightest chance that you are being motivated by anything other than professional considerations of intercepting whatever this is, trying to identify it, making contact with any life forms evolved, I don't understand the reference to honor, Akira. I don't recall ever lying to you in the past, and I'm certain you never have to me. Kirk knew that he had won. He also believed that everything he had said or left unsaid was the whole and complete truth. Chapter 15. Captain's Log. Stardate 7413.4. Thanks to Mr. Spock's timely arrival and assistance, engines are rebalanced to full warp capacity. Repair time less than 3 hours, which permits us now to intercept intruder while still more than a day from Earth. Kirk glanced toward the science station. Spock had returned there just moments ago, now in regulation uniform and haircut, but still deep in the same self-isolation. Sulu was giving a curious glance in that direction, too. The helmsman had no doubt that Spock's presence increased their odds of survival, but he could not help thinking that the old Spock would have improved those odds even more. "Ready, Captain," said Scott's intercom voice. "Stand by to give us warp power," replied Kirk. "Our engines are not yet perfectly balanced, Captain," said Spock, "but I have adjusted our intermix formula accordingly." Decker had come out of a turbolift during this, his eyes scanning bridge consoles as he moved to Kirk's side. "Recommend yellow alert all decks, Captain." "Quite unnecessary," said Spock. "Yellow alert all decks," ordered Kirk. He had gone with Deckard's recommendation as much out of curiosity as anything else, but the Vulcan gave no indication that he had either heard or cared. Meanwhile, Chekhov had begun the alert. The klaxon was blaring. "Yellow alert, all decks! Yellow alert, all decks! Yellow alert!" The computer voice stopped in mid-word as Kirk touched the silencer. Decker was looking at Spock apologetically. "I'm not questioning your computations, Mr. Spock, but it is close to the same formula that put us into the wormhole last time." It annoyed Kirk to see how completely Spock was ignoring this. Considering what had happened on their last attempt, Decker was right in recommending everything be buttoned down. "Science officer," said Kirk, "I'll trouble you to acknowledge our exec when he speaks to you." Spock turned to Decker. "There is not the slightest risk of a hyperspace rupture, executive officer." Kirk turned toward Sulu. "Ahead, warp 1. "Warp 1, sir. Beginning acceleration." They could all feel the power throb, the primal fury of matter and antimatter shattering into energy. Then came the surge forward, which not even their inertial dampeners could quite handle. Despite the certainty in Spock's statement, an eddy of tension could be felt circling the bridge. "Warp 0.9, 0.92, 0.95, 0.98. Sulu's auxiliary viewers showed the power effect building between the great engine nacelles. Any instant now, either a smoothly accelerated entry into hyperspace or... The quantum shift happened. The star mass congealed in front of them in an eerie blaze of cold light. "Warp 1, sir." Kirk forced himself to wait out the long interval which had passed that time before apparent success had dissolved into chaos. "Cancel yellow alert," he finally said to Chekhov. Then to Sulu. Take her on up, Helm. Everybody breathed, and Kirk turned toward the science console where he would have liked to at least nod his gratitude, but Spock was immersed in calculations. Scott's elated voice could be heard on the intercom. Proper treatment, that's all this lady wanted, Captain. She's not even straining. They took her up by smooth, unfaltering stages to warp 7.61. Spock had marked this as their limit until engines received a final balance. Then, when everything had been checked, Kirk rose, keying his intercom. Dr. McCoy, please meet me in the officers' lounge in 5 minutes. He moved for the elevators, adding, I'd be obliged if you could join us there too, Mr. Spock. The officers' lounge was located 3 decks below the bridge at the forward edge of the command superstructure. The observation ports here looked out over the starship's vast saucer section and provided the best shipboard views of space and, at warp speeds, of hyperspace. With the ship in warp drive, the myriad of stars visible from here were coalesced into a mass ahead of them, and the starship's incredible velocity was obvious even there, as occasional stars would seem to abruptly slip free of the rest, whipping slightly past the starship to vanish into the reverse coalescence of stars behind them. McCoy liked the officers' lounge. It pleased him that Starfleet could understand the necessity of providing luxury like this, especially for those whose years of service and distinction merited it. And it was made doubly pleasant by the fact that entry here was forbidden to no one. Its exclusive use by command-grade officers was merely a tradition which had grown out of the honest respect which Starfleet's senior officers had earned. The Vulcan came in, still cold and aloof. Reporting as ordered, Captain. McCoy felt half angry and half pitying. Despite the cold Vulcan exterior being presented by Spock, McCoy had known him too well for too many years to miss the small signs of human torment that were present too. It annoyed the doctor that Spock, so perfectly logical in other things, felt compelled to repudiate his human bloodline. It also troubled him that the strain of this might push Spock past some breaking point. Sit down, please, Kirk said. Spock remained standing. Sir, I would appreciate Dr. McCoy absenting himself from this interview. McCoy saw Kirk's look harden. I want him here, Kirk said. Sit down. This was unmistakably given as an order. Even then, for a moment, it looked as if Spock would refuse. Finally, he sat, but formally, rigidly, his eyes centered on the captain alone. Kirk decided to maintain the official tone in his voice. Your arrival report stated that while on Vulcan you sensed unusually strong thought emanations, which seemed to be part of some entity or entities traveling in this direction. Can you tell us any more about these thoughts? Spock answered equally formally. I could sense only what seemed an almost omniscient pattern of perfect logic, sir. I can explain nothing more. I understand nothing more. Have you had any contact with this consciousness since then? Asked McCoy. Spock kept his eyes on Kirk, presenting his answer there. Affirmative. Since arriving aboard, a second contact in which I sensed some puzzlement, also some urgency in needing some answer. As to the nature of the puzzle, I have no clue. Is that all of it so far? Asked Kirk. 2 mind contacts with something out there, nothing more? Spock wished Kirk's question had not been asked so broadly. On Vulcan, I seemed for a moment to be also sensing your thoughts, Captain. It felt as if you were wondering whether the Klingon cruisers and crews were actually destroyed or had been converted into exhibits of some sort. Kirk's expression told McCoy there had indeed been such a thought. Although this surprised McCoy much less than the fact that Spock had admitted sensing it, considering his present unfriendliness. It was common knowledge that telepathic rapport between Vulcan and human was possible only in cases of extraordinarily close friendship. Kirk nodded casually. I must have been wishing that I could discuss all this with you. I had acquired the habit of having you around during emergencies. McCoy watched as Spock continued to sit staring expressionlessly straight ahead. Why couldn't Spock respond to him? Kirk could hardly risk begging one of his officers for friendship. I heard you went to Gaul after you left, Kirk said. Were you studying with the Vulcan Masters? That question invades my personal life, Captain. Emotions, Spock? McCoy had seen the barest flicker of expression at Kirk's mention of the Masters. Is it possible you failed? Spock turned slowly toward McCoy, acknowledging his presence for the first time. Your deductions do you credit, Doctor, if your puerile curiosity does not. My professional curiosity, science officer. McCoy was capable of a formally official tone, too. And am I seeing anger now? McCoy had seen a glint of it, even though Spock had composed his expression almost instantly. It was precisely this kind of thing which had made Spock object to the doctor's presence here. He had no choice but to nod stiff acknowledgement of the truth of McCoy's observation, but he addressed himself back to Kirk. I had believed that a discipline at Gaul would exercise my human half. I did not succeed. I have not yet succeeded in finally accomplishing that. The fact that you had sensed patterns of perfect logic, Kirk had to ask. Does that have something to do with your being here? It is my only hope of accomplishing what the Masters could not, said Spock. Well, isn't it lucky we happen to be going your way? Said McCoy. Let it drop, Bones, Kirk said. But he kept his tone firm as he continued to Spock. You are my science officer. I'll expect an immediately report on anything further you learn or sense from here on. I have accepted service here as a Starfleet officer, said Spock stiffly. Kirk nodded, accepting the rebuke. This has been painful for me, too. Thank you. Spock turned and went out without a word. Kirk and McCoy exchanged a troubled look. Then Kirk turned to go, too. Jim, called McCoy. Kirk turned back, and McCoy waited until certain Spock was out of hearing range. However seriously Vulcans take their oaths, remember that everything and everyone has a breaking point. Kirk shook his head. I can't believe Spock would ever be turned against us. Jim, if that consciousness is as enormous and powerful as Spock describes it, he may have no choice. Chapter 19. Ilea's tricorder hit the deck and rolled over twice before lying still. In that same time, Decker's eyes had taken in the fact she was indisputably gone, and he was turning toward Uhura. Lingua code, high speed. Tell them that it is a life form they've just taken from our ship. Transmit Deltan life support requirements. Kirk caught Decker's eye and nodded agreement with the urgency of the message. Undoubtedly, they should have sent a similar message when the security man Phillips disappeared. They had simply assumed that the bright flash of his disappearance was destruction.
But since both the plasma energy probe and Ilea had vanished together, it was more likely that the brilliant flash was part of some transportation process doing much the same job as the Enterprise's transporter chambers. Meanwhile, the agony in Decker's expression made it clear that he was feeling greater affection for Ilea than he had realized he carried. The main viewer showed that Sulu had the Enterprise still on a parallel course with the immense alien, keeping position at a full 100 kilometers away. And even at this distance, the enormous bulk of the other vessel more than filled the big viewer screen. Kirk could hear Uhura sending repeats of the life support information on Ilea. Spock turned back to his science console and began to run the low-power sensor scans which Kirk had ordered only seconds before the frightening plasma energy appeared. Kirk struggled to think clearly and consecutively about all of this. Had they angered the aliens when Spock shorted out the probe's examination of Enterprise's computer library? Possibly, but Kirk doubted that the plasma energy probe left for that reason, or that it snatched up Ilea out of pique. It was maddening to be uncertain of everything when the intruders were clearly able to communicate with the Enterprise had they wished to do so. The Enterprise suddenly wrenched sideways. Even Spock showed some signs of being startled. It was as if something had yanked at them. Tractor beam? Decker was making a quick guess. Tractor beam confirmed, said Spock. One of his monitors was showing the play of force which was exerting pressure on the ship's hull. Red alert? Asked Decker. Kirk shook his head. The Enterprise was still on yellow alert. All critical emergency stations were manned. On the main viewer, the image of the alien continued growing as the tractor beam pulled them still closer. Decker was calling for a relief crewman to take over the navigator's console. Engineering, full emergency power. Kirk snapped the order into the intercom and got an immediate confirmation from Montgomery Scott. They could feel the Enterprise straining as she tried to break free of whatever force held her in its grip. Engineer to bridge. I can't hold this power long. Intermix chamber is heating up fast. Spock studied his readings, then turned to pronounce a verdict. We cannot break free, Captain. We do not have a fraction of the power necessary. Delay emergency power, Scotty. Aye, sir. What in the hell has got a hold of us? Kirk ignored Scott's question. Whatever it was, it made him uneasy to be so totally helpless. He had a vision of some gigantic alien child thing over there reeling in a tiny minnow it had caught, and which it might soon flay open and examine. Spock, are you sensing anything? Then Kirk saw the Vulcan's eyebrow go up a trifle. He realized that he had almost shouted the question and immediately regretted it. Whatever happened, he must be able to view it coolly and dispassionately. The intruder vessel was pulling them very close. Why? The replacement navigator entered the bridge on a run, Decker motioning her to the empty station. She gave one look to the frightening image on the bridge viewer, then began quickly orientating herself to Ilea's board. McCoy arrived on the bridge, tried to avoid looking startled as he took in the viewer image. Well, he said grimly to Kirk, it looks like they've decided to examine us. Kirk felt a gut chill as he remembered his invented image of the gigantic child alien slicing the Enterprise open. It was costing Decker some effort to appear to be making a routine executive officer's bridge circuit, and Kirk admired the success with which he was pulling it off. Chekhov was glancing at Decker as if wondering if he'd gone mad. Kirk looked quickly back to the viewer. It was drawing them in rapidly. They were coming critically close to it. Had they annoyed it into angrily crushing them against its side? It was almost instinct to turn quickly to Spock for his assessment. But what was wrong with Spock? His head was turned to one side, his eyes fixed on what? Then Kirk realized that Spock was again attempting mind contact. Kirk hoped desperately that it was with the intruder aliens. I read deceleration, said Sulu, relieved. They're pulling us in more slowly. They had been brought to less than 100 meters away and were being pulled along the incredible length of the alien colossus. There was not even a whispered word from a bridge crew member as they watched and almost disbelieved what their eyes showed them. It would have been difficult to describe what they were seeing as the hull of a ship. Some of it could hardly be called even a surface, being more like great swirling ponds of an unknown and impossible energy substance. My God, it was opening up. Up ahead, there was a seam of light near the aft end of the huge vessel, which was widening into an almost mouth-like shape. Oh, no. Someone's voice had quivered it. It's opening like a maw. This from Sulu, being forced out of him in shocked surprise. Kirk could feel ripples of terror begin to circle the bridge. Sulu had made an unfortunate choice of the word maw, although the helmsman could hardly be blamed for describing the look of it so accurately. Any moment, panic might sweep the entire starship. Kirk knew that one of the primal human fears was that of being devoured by some other gigantic creature. McCoy headed for the elevators, calling over his shoulder to Chekhov. Get medical observers to all decks, fast. All decks attention. Kirk keyed his intercom, trying to sound matter-of-fact. This is the captain speaking. It should be obvious that the vessel out there could have destroyed us long ago if its crew meant us any harm. It seems probable that we are being moved to a place, a compartment of their vessel, possibly where we hope communication between us and them can be facilitated. Kirk knew that his announcement, laced with probably and possibly, really said nothing. But he could already see some relief on a couple of faces. Apparently it had helped to remind everyone that this was merely an enormous vessel out there. He managed to smile at his own gallows humor. Merely a vessel? On the main viewer, the opening had widened large enough to accommodate several Enterprises, and they were close enough to see that the gaping mouth was actually the beginning of a vast chamber which extended a dozen or so kilometers ahead into the incredible alien vessel. Apparently, a compartment of the vast ship was dimly and intermittently lit by eerie power field eruptions which appeared and vanished in there like heat lightning. We're being pulled through with ample clearance on all sides. It was the replacement navigator checking her maneuver monitor. Kirk gave her an approving glance, searching for the name. Yes, DeFalco. There might be something about her worth remembering. Your estimate of this, Exec? Asked Kirk. They seem to be taking care not to damage us. Agreed, Captain, said Decker. I guess that they want a closer look at us. It should be interesting to see what they look like. Then they were inside. Kirk looked up to see that Spock was standing beside him. There was fatigue visible on the Vulcan features as he examined the main viewer image. Uhura, shuddering, pointed at the gargantuan sheets of ragged-edged force fields which they were being pulled past. They look like teeth. They're not teeth, snapped Kirk. Nevertheless, he found himself glancing at Spock for confirmation. Spock was still peering at the main viewer. Then he announced, I sensed insatiable curiosity, Captain. Kirk frowned at the viewer image. Was something changing? Reverse on viewer, he called. Reverse on viewer, replied Sulu as he punched in a rear view. The maw was closing behind them. Trapped? The word was on everyone's face. Viewer ahead, said Kirk quietly. I believe they have a bottomless hunger for knowledge, Spock continued. It was a hunger which Spock shared. He wondered if this was a thread which could lead to some kinship. Recommend we stand by on maneuvering thrusters just in case. This from Decker, and Kirk nodded his agreement to Sulu. Also, give us a scan, helmsman. Let's have a look around in here. The main viewer began to show that this was, as Kirk had believed, a vast compartment within the great vessel, enough room for a fair-sized city. And yet its vastness was not really empty, not during every movement at least. Unusual shapes and patterns appeared and vanished continually, undoubtedly representing some incredible technology which apparently used energy or some form of energy plasma, much like humans and others use matter for constructing bulkheads and engines and other shipboard necessities. This absence of matter, at least as humans understood the word, lent a curious unreality to everything. Sometimes it could be a breathtakingly lovely, colorful ribbon pattern of light, suddenly becoming an enormous explosion of energy, then vanishing as new shapes reappeared here, there, becoming still different shapes. There was a sense of order in it, too, a feeling that all this was merely the smoothly functioning apparatus of this great vessel. During this, Spock turned to Kirk. "Permission to use sensors." "Affirmative. Begin sensor scans." Spock hurried to his science console. It seemed probable to both of them that the aliens would certainly understand their being curious about where they were being taken. "Their tractor beam has released us, sir," called Chekhov. "They've brought us to a halt. No forward motion," said Sulu. "Standing by on maneuvering thrusters." Sulu had brought the main viewer to ahead, and it showed a lace bulwark of powerful patterns closing off any further travel into the alien ship. "Hold station," said Kirk to Helm. "Thrusters at station keeping." Spock was working rapidly at his console, shifting from one set of readouts to another in a pattern too rapid for Kirk to follow. Then Spock hit a master control, part of his console going dark. There was a trace of almost human disappointment on his features. "Captain," he said, "all our scans are being reflected back. Our sensors are useless." Kirk acknowledged. "Have you been able to analyze any part of this?" "I believe the visible shapes and patterns to be energy fields, undoubtedly part of the vessel's mechanisms." Was there a touch of awe in Spock's voice? "A technology so incredibly sophisticated that I cannot—" He was cut off by the voice of the bridge computer. "Intruder alert! Intruder alert!" There was a stir on the bridge. The recent visit from the aliens' frightening plasma energy probe was still very much on everyone's mind. Chekhov was reacting to a reading. "Deck 4, Captain. Officers' quarters." "Spock, anything?" Spock was shaking his head. "I have no unusual power field readings from there, Captain. I should guess it is not their plasma energy probe this time." "I'm getting a heat reading, something in the 1,000-degree range. No, correct that, 950, and still dropping. Whatever happened down there, it's cooling very rapidly." Kirk was there, examining Chekhov's security console readings. They exchanged a look, and Kirk whirled to Decker. "You have the con, Will. Come with me, please, Mr. Spock." Chapter 20. A pair of security guards were waiting at the cabin marked Ilea, Lieutenant, Nav 07719. Spock's eyebrow came up on seeing the name on the door. Kirk had learned from Chekhov's panel that intruder alert was in from their former navigator's quarters, and this had prompted him to leave Decker behind at the con. One of the security men had an identity sensor trained on the door. Its tiny monitor was displaying digital readings. 165, 160, 155. "Whatever's in there was white hot only a few minutes ago," said a security officer. "Fascinating," said Spock. Kirk nodded, aware that the Vulcan referred to the fact that neither smoke nor flame alarms had been triggered in there, and since a flare of temperatures that high should have caused something to burn, the aliens who had taken Lieutenant Ilea from them must have sent over something unusual to her cabin. Whatever it might be, it was no place for Will Decker, who had reacted with such anguish at the Delta navigator's disappearance. Other security details were hurrying in to close off bulkheads and handle the other intruder alert routines. Kirk motioned to one guard to accompany himself and Spock. "No weapons," he cautioned. Kirk cracked the door open slowly until they could peer into what seemed to be an empty cabin. As he expected, there was no sign of the frightening plasma energy probe. The alien certainly realized by now that it was the wrong kind of device for an investigation of the Enterprise crew. Spock was indicating the guard's identity sensor readouts. Whatever was in the cabin, its temperature had dropped to 38 degrees and was beginning to hold steady near that temperature. As they moved carefully in through the door, Kirk could make out a faint scent of Ilea still lingering in the fabric of her lounge bed. "The heat source is in the sonic shower," said Spock. "What the hell?" Kirk spun quickly toward the cabin's dressing alcove. Through the transparent door of the hydrosonic shower, he saw something moving. It was definitely a body, looking very human, or Deltan. The heat they had read in there? Some malfunction in the sonic cubicle? Or had something been cooling itself down to normal Enterprise temperatures there? Then, whatever it was, it moved closer to the transparent door. It was unmistakably a naked female. Kirk stepped to the cabin's master control panel, touched the sonic's door switch. The transparency slid open. It was Ilea. Lovely, almost unbearably lovely in her nudity. Then Kirk felt a warning touch from Spock. "This is not our navigator," Spock said quietly. But it almost certainly was Ilea, except that there was some sort of a glowing light from the throat. Kirk found his eyes shifting from the tiny light glow to what seemed impossibly lovely, hard-tipped breasts, which were at this moment swinging around to point directly at him. Damn. It had to be Deltan pheromones that were doing this to him. This meant Spock was wrong. She had to be Ilea. "Ensign," said Kirk, "get Dr. McCoy up here fast." It took the young security officer a moment to force his eyes away from the Deltan nakedness. Kirk knew how difficult it was. He just realized that the pointing of those two breasts toward himself had simply meant that she was turning to look toward them. The eyes. They seemed to be devoid of living warmth. Was this somehow Ilea's dead body? A corpse reanimated and controlled by the aliens? Kirk's direction of thought was bringing his attention back to her naked body as he stepped towards her in the sonic's cubicle. Her cold eyes followed his movements as he punched in a dress code, then slid the transparent door closed long enough for a leisure robe to form over her nakedness. What was the look Spock had given him? Amusement or pity? Apparently, Deltan pheromones created no sensual excitement in the Vulcan. Otherwise, he would have understood the wisdom of putting some garment on her. The transparent door slid open again, and the Deltan form spoke. "You are the Kirk unit?" Kirk saw Spock cock an ear as if half understanding. The voice came out unpracticed, like something mechanical trying to sound alive. "You are the Kirk unit?" "Remarkable," said Spock. "It learns very fast." "I'm Captain James T. Kirk, commanding USS Enterprise," Kirk replied, feeling somewhat foolish saying this to what looked like his own navigator. Was Ilea really this incredibly sensuous? "I have been programmed to observe and record normal functions of the carbon-based units infesting USS Enterprise." "Programmed by whom?" asked Kirk. "It is important we communicate with them." The probe seemed puzzled. "If you require a designation, I was programmed by Voyager." Its voice was becoming more understandable, taking on some of their navigator's throaty Deltan vocal tone. The Vulcan was watching it in absolute fascination, but it was intellectual fascination. The Deltan scents were clearly wasted on Vulcans. "Who is Voyager?" Kirk asked. "Voyager is that which programmed me." "Are you referring to someone in that larger vessel out there? The captain or the leader of whoever is aboard it?" The door opened and McCoy rushed in. "Jim, what's—" McCoy's trained eye took her in for only a moment before his medical tricorder came out fast, and he began a scan of the female form. "Who is Voyager?" Kirk repeated. "Voyager is that which seeks the Creator." Kirk had difficulty believing that his ears had heard correctly. The Creator? The considerable astonishment on Spock's features said he must have heard these same words too. "Jim, this is a mechanism." It was McCoy, indicating Ilea. Kirk stared at the ship's doctor. This Deltan female form, as far as his eyes could tell, looked exactly real. It had reacted with Deltan sensuality and sexuality by releasing pheromones, and Kirk knew that both he and the security ensign could testify to their reality. Spock was making his own scan with the doctor's tricorder. "I believe this form replaces the plasma energy probe which had been sent to examine our vessel, Captain. It may even be the same probe using the Ilea pattern it carried back with it." Kirk turned to the female form, making his question a demand. "Where is Lieutenant Ilea?" "That unit no longer functions." The mechanism's tone sounded factual. "I have been given its form to more readily communicate with the carbon-based units infesting Enterprise." "Carbon-based units?" the security guard said, feeling some ominous undertone. "Humans, Ensign Chavez," McCoy said dryly. "Us." One of Spock's eyebrows had raised at the probe's use of the word infesting. He seemed to find it interesting, but Kirk had a more pressing question, which must come first. "Voyager's ship," Kirk asked. "Why does it travel in toward the third planet of the solar system directly ahead?" "Voyager travels to the third planet to find the Creator." It stunned them. Whatever Voyager might be, some single great entity or an entire alien race, it was simply impossible that anything capable of that vessel's technology could believe that Earth was the location of anything that could be called Creator. Kirk tried to pursue it sensibly. "What is the Creator?" he asked. "That which creates," answered the Ilea probe. The mechanical sound in its voice was almost gone. It also seemed to move more gracefully, as if becoming accustomed to the use of the various mechanisms making up its body. "What does Voyager want of the Creator?" "To join with him." "Join with the Creator?" Spock asked. "How?" "Voyager and the Creator will become one." "What does the Creator create?" asked Spock. "The Creator is that which created Voyager," the Ilea probe was saying. This perfectly circular logic suggested there might be some considerable communications gulf between them and Voyager. It might be difficult, perhaps impossible, to share common concepts or values. This probe had been sent to study them, and it seemed likely to Kirk that any findings accumulated here might be totally incomprehensible to whatever sent the probe. "Who is Voyager?" Kirk asked again. "Voyager is that which seeks the Creator." Kirk wondered if this might not be the literal truth. The life forms over there were likely to be as advanced as their enormous vessel, or their probes. What better use of their knowledge and technology than to seek the source of themselves and the universe? Kirk could accept that as philosophically noble and even proper, but he also knew that nothing definable as Creator would be found in the very ordinary planet ahead. And what might happen to that very ordinary world if the crew of that gigantic vessel felt disappointed with it? The Ilea probe had apparently waited long enough.
I am ready to commence my observations, it said.
Doctor, said Spock quickly, a thorough examination of this probe might provide insight into those who manufactured it and how to communicate with them.
McCoy agreed, nodding as he took an ILEA arm to escort it out. He was spun around off balance. The gentle tug in its arm had been like trying to pull a building after him. It ignored McCoy, addressed Kirk. I am programmed to observe and record normal functioning procedures of the carbon-based units. The examination is a normal function, Kirk said with his old resourcefulness. The ILEA probe considered it a moment. You may proceed, it said.
Chapter 28. Kirk stepped up to the gold-surfaced plaque on the old probe. Most of the inscription was still legible. VGER6 NASA. Between the V and the G was a torn, gaping hole, mute record of some encounter with space hazard. VGER. Voyager, said Kirk. He traced a finger where the letters had been obliterated. VOYAGER. Voyager 6. This particular space capsule was well known to the 4 Starfleet officers. Its history was studied by every Starfleet cadet. Voyager 6 having been the first human-made object to enter a time continuum, although the reason for its sudden disappearance had not been understood at the time. I shot an arrow into the air, said McCoy. Kirk nodded. Looking at the NASA symbol, what would they have thought of the way this arrow fell back to Earth? It re-entered normal space on the far side of the galaxy, said Kirk to Spock, and must have wandered into the gravitational field of the planet you saw. The great machines there repaired it. More than that, said Spock. They discovered its programming, and being machines themselves, they obeyed. The Creator commands, nodded McCoy. Its 20th century programming would have been very simple, said Decker. Collect all possible data, transmit those findings. Kirk nodded. Learn all that is learnable. Return that information to the Creator. And the machines obeyed literally, said Spock. They equipped Voyager with scanning and measuring devices from their own advanced technology, and also gave it the power needed to return to Earth as commanded. It was difficult not to feel awed over Voyager's magnificent odyssey. And on the long journey back, it gathered so much knowledge that it achieved consciousness, said Decker. You will now disclose the information, demanded the ILEA probe. We now have 7 minutes, Jim, said Spock quietly. Kirk gave the Vulcan a nod. Even with all this, there was something comforting in hearing Spock use his first name again. Well, at least we know what its answer is, said McCoy. But if I were Voyager, I certainly wouldn't believe us. Unless we can prove we're right, said Decker. And I think we can. The binary code signal that Voyager sent out was part of the Voyager design, a signal meaning that it had data to transmit. And NASA was then supposed to send a signal back, instructing it to transmit that data. Kirk Unit, why has the Creator not answered? The ILEA probe's tone was harsh. Captain to Enterprise, said Kirk into his communicator. Uhura's voice came back immediately. Enterprise? Kirk Unit, you will supply the information now. Why has the Creator not? Kirk interrupted. The Creator will explain itself. Voyager will have to have its answer in a few. There will be no further delay. You will describe the Creator immediately. Voyager, if your probe keeps interfering, the Creator will never answer.
Kirk turned his back on the probe, lifting his communicator again, speaking quickly. We need this fast, Uhura. Order up the ship's library records on late 20th century NASA probe Voyager 6. Specifically, get us the old NASA code signal and frequency ordering Voyager to transmit data collected. Aye, sir. From his communicator, Kirk could hear his own voice coming from the bridge speakers as Uhura relayed his actual command in the most efficient way possible. Spock was using his tricorder to examine the way in which the base of the Voyager capsule seemed to merge into and become part of Voyager's brain nucleus design. It was also Kirk's first moment in which to glance around, and his eyes were drawn underfoot where he could see faint light glows which indicated that the NASA capsule was still functioning and was interconnected with the greater Voyager all around them. Then Kirk's eyes were drawn to the Ilea probe. It looked different somehow. McCoy and Decker were looking at it in astonishment, and McCoy was motioning to him. Voyager seems to have taken your threat literally. It's released control of the probe. Ilea, said Decker. Tell the captain what's happened. I've been here, in here. It was like I was dreaming it, and then Will was helping me wake up. The probe turned toward Decker. I wanted to help you, but Voyager knew it and took control of this body I'm in. She's alive, said Decker to Kirk. Somehow Voyager was able to put the living person in there. It is Ilea, Jim, said McCoy. You can even see it. Bones was right. There was life in her eyes, a living expression on her face. Seized with a sudden idea, Kirk indicated Voyager 6. Ilea, do you remember this from Academy history? Ilea looked, nodded immediately. Yes, of course, it... Misinformation is forbidden, Kirk Unit. It was suddenly the probe again, cold, mechanical. No, damn it, shouted Decker. His voice was drowned in deafening thunder sounds above them. The great pillar of light seemed to explode into fragments as the brain nucleus island trembled beneath their feet. Enterprise, come in, called Kirk into his communicator. Uhura was answering before he finished. We've just received the response code, sir. Broadcast it, interrupted Kirk. Then he whirled to the Ilea probe. Voyager, the Creator will answer you now. Spock had come hurrying back to them from the Voyager capsule. Decker still retained enough presence of mind to take Spock's tricorder and set in the radio frequency just given by Uhura. The ominous flashes and thundering sounds began to subside. From the tricorder in Decker's hand, they could hear the thin, high-pitched code signal begin. In the same instant, there was the faint sound of a short-circuit arc from the direction of Voyager 6. Spock's acute hearing picked it up. He turned in time to see a faint curl of smoke briefly visible at the capsule's maintenance hatch. Meanwhile, the code signal could still be heard coming from the tricorder as Uhura completed transmitting it. Signal has been sent, Captain, said Uhura's voice. Shall we repeat? Jim, she's back, said Decker. What? Kirk could not imagine what Decker was talking about until he saw that he had taken the probe's hand. Why in the hell was Decker doing that at a time like this? Kirk stepped in, confronting the probe as before. Voyager, the Creator has responded. Yes, sir, said Ilea's voice. Captain, over here, please. It was Spock calling urgency from the Voyager 6 capsule. He was opening the cover to the small maintenance hatch there. The Vulcan stepped aside, indicating into the hatch. You will notice, Captain, that the transceiver antenna connection has been burned through. Kirk looked inside. A small, dark burn mark could be seen where the wiring had parted. He made the mistake of reaching in to explore it with his finger and yanked his hand back in surprise. What the hell? It's still hot. Exactly, Captain. Voyager did that just as the signal began. It can't have done that, Spock. Voyager is desperate to hear from its Creator. It is desperate to unite with its Creator, Captain. The probe told us that, but we did not understand. McCoy nodded. Voyager's purpose is to survive, to unite with the Creator. But I thought the probe meant that metaphorically. Voyager speaks and interprets everything literally, said Spock as he looked around at the amphitheater design. It no doubt plans to unite physically with the Creator here. Do you mean what I think you're saying, Spock? Asked McCoy. Voyager is planning to capture God? It is the perfectly logical thing for Voyager to do, said Spock. Voyager knows itself to be incomplete, but has no way of learning what it needs or whether the Creator would even agree to provide it. Spock pointed to the severed antenna connection. Ergo, for the Creator to obtain Voyager's knowledge, it must bring the signal here in person. It was a stunning revelation. Kirk realized that Spock must be right. It was the most certain answer that Voyager could have. By its very nature, a Creator has and is every answer to everything. Where's Decker? Kirk was realizing the exec and the ILEA mechanism had been missing through most of this. McCoy indicated past Voyager 6 where the two were talking together quietly, hands joined. Kirk did not have the heart to summon him, even if the rest of them somehow survived. There was no way to know what would happen to ILEA's living consciousness. We now have 4 minutes, said Spock. 3, connected Kirk. I ordered Scott to go 2005 a minute earlier. Well? Asked McCoy. We can't very well deliver the people who actually built Voyager. Spock, we need an answer, said Kirk. Will it accept us? Spock was eyeing the 20th century capsule and the nucleus design around it. As Dr. McCoy said, we all create God in our image. Voyager still expects a machine. It probably plans something similar to what occurs in our ship's transporter chamber, except that 2 forms will be reduced to energy. And combine both of them together into a new form. It was Decker's voice. He and ILEA were standing at this side of Voyager capsule with Spock's tricorder still in Decker's hand. Request permission to proceed, Captain. Decker was making an adjustment on the tricorder. Wait, said Kirk. We'll discuss who does it only after we're certain of what. Jim, it's got to be done, with or without your permission. As Decker's eyes turned to the open access hatch, Kirk moved in, grabbing for the exec arm. But the ILEA mechanism shifted and lifted Kirk away as though he were a child, sending him sprawling at Spock and McCoy's feet. As he started to his feet again, he felt a hand restraining him. Let it happen, Captain, said Spock's voice. I suspect he knows exactly what he's doing. Decker nodded. I do know. From the tricorder in his hand, they could hear the high, thin sound of the code signal beginning. A pulsating light glow was appearing all around the base of Voyager 6. I want this, called Decker. Just as you wanted the Enterprise. At the same time, Decker placed the tricorder into the Voyager's open hatch, pushing it into contact with the space capsule's transceiver. Something was happening to the great pillar of white light thrusting up around them. It was trembling like a live thing, a lovely thing in which spiraling, brilliant colors began to appear. The colors began fanning out over their heads like a great unfolding blossom. Even Spock's eyes were widening. There was breathtaking beauty in what was happening. It was becoming all beauty, driving out any feeling of fear they might have had. McCoy was standing, transfixed. Kirk became aware that they were also hearing beauty, and feeling it too. At the center of the cascading colors, Decker's body was beginning to glow with the same brilliance, and there was a look of serenity on his face. The same look was on ILEA's face as she stepped into the spiraling colors with him. Jim, this is transcendence. It was Spock, indicating around them where the entire concave amphitheater was beginning to glow, the brain nucleus material under their feet becoming transparent, and deep down inside it they could see a great whirl of spiraling color that was growing in size and brightness like some immense flower blossoming into life.
The doctor had almost a look of rapture on his face, and Kirk had to shake him to get his attention. "We've got to get back to the ship." The forms of Decker and Ilea were still expanding, perfect serenity on both their faces as the spiraling colors became part of them and their gigantic shapes began becoming part of Voyager. The three officers turned and hurried up the concave side of the amphitheater design. As they hurried over the top lip of it, they could see the entire brain nucleus island was aglow. They headed for Enterprise on a run. Even the great brain hemisphere around them was shimmering into lovely patterns. Voyager was transcending, flowering, taking new form. They ran out of air, or would have by human standards. Spock's Vulcan lungs held out the longest, and he virtually carried them onto the starship saucer section, where spacesuited figures hurried them through the hatch and into the airlock.
Okay, I have to tell you, I was just looking on eBay where I go for all kinds of things I love, and there it was.
That hologram trading card. One of the rarest, the last one I needed for my set. Shiny like the
designer handbag of my dreams. One of a kind. eBay had it, and now everyone's asking, ooh, where'd you get your
windshield wipers? eBay has all the parts that fit my car. No more annoying, just beautiful.
Whatever you love, find it on eBay. eBay. Things people love.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes in detail.
This episode is brought to you by Atlassian. Atlassian makes the team collaboration software that powers enterprise businesses around the world, including over 80% of the Fortune 500. With Atlassian's AI-powered software like Jira, Confluence, and Loom, you'll have more time to do the work that matters. In fact, Atlassian customers experience a 25% reduction in project duration per year. Unleash the potential of your team at Atlassian.com. Atlassian.
On the bridge, they had a last look at the transcendence. It then became too lovely for them to comprehend, and so it was gone without ever really leaving. When Kirk began to relate to the here and the now of the Enterprise bridge, he turned to Spock. "I wonder, did we just see the beginning of a new life form out there?"
"Yes, Captain. We witnessed a birth. Perhaps also a direction in which some of us may evolve."
"Only some of us, Spock?"
"It would seem to me, Captain, that the dimensions of creation make our future choices almost limitless."
"It's been a long time since I helped deliver a baby," said McCoy. "I hope we humans gave this one a good start." "I think we did," Kirk answered. "The Decker part of us gives us the ability to want and to enjoy, to hope and to dare to pretend and laugh." Kirk smiled at his next thought. "And the child will probably have some very interesting Deltan attributes, too. It should have an exciting future." McCoy gave a look toward Spock. "And our other emotions, fear, greed, jealousy, hate?"
"Those things are the misuse of emotion, Doctor,"
said Spock. Kirk found himself feeling very comfortable as he settled himself back into the center seat. He was realizing that there was a certain shrewd and sometimes ruthless commanding admiral down there who right now would be unable to deny him anything, even permanent command of the Enterprise if Kirk demanded it. Well, that suited former Admiral James Tiberius Kirk fine. He did not intend to let Hayakiro Nagura get off this hook. "Interrogative from Starfleet," Uhura said. "They request damage and injury report and complete vessel status." "Vessel status operational. List Security Officer Phillips, Lieutenant Ilea, and Captain Decker. List them as missing." "Aye, sir. And Starfleet also requests that you and your department heads beam down immediately for debriefing."
Answer, request denied. Sir? Uhura was looking toward him, startled. Simply answer, request denied. Isn't that clear enough, Commander? Uhura understood, and she smiled. Aye, sir. It should be clear to one and all. Kirk turned to see Chief Engineer Scott coming onto the bridge with Dr. Chapel. Scotty, isn't it about time we gave the Enterprise a proper shakedown? Scott was instantly pleased. I would say it's time for that, sir, aye. He turned to Spock. We can have you back on Vulcan in 4 days, Mr. Spock.
Unnecessary, Mr. Scott. My task on Vulcan is completed.
Kirk turned to the helm. Take us out of orbit, Mr. Sulu. Heading, sir? DeFalco asked. Kirk indicated generally ahead. Out there. That-a-way.
A most logical choice, Captain,
Spock said. The main viewer switched to show the lovely blue-white sphere receding behind them. As Kirk watched it grow still smaller, he decided that Earth was a place that he would never want to live without. And yet he would not want to live there permanently either. At least, not for a very long time. Viewer ahead. Go to Warp 1. Accelerating to Warp 1, sir, said Sulu. At first, there were the old familiar star patterns, and then the quantum shift happened. The star mass congealed in front of them, and they were in hyperspace. He relaxed back and began thinking about where he would take her first.